one of the amazing things that's come out of this conference is that we have a fantastic shared vision for good food in the Highlands. And not only that, but there is so much energy for this. And it's been amazing that this has been such an action-based conference, really focusing on actual realistic things that we can achieve at the end of this. And this is absolutely the time for change. We've got COVID, we've got Brexit, we've got the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. There is so much talk at the moment about food systems and about policy around those things. So we think our job as the policy group is to bring the Highland voice to the ear of policymakers, to share with them our vision of good food and what we want to do and what we can do, and get them on our side, so get things moving in our direction. So we're not policymakers, but we really do believe that our vision and the ideas that we're putting in place and the projects that we're working on in this group really will work and really will make a difference for us. And we're not professional policy influencers, but we do know some of the things that policymakers need. And that is, they need evidence, really clear evidence that a system or a vision works. They need that to be well communicated, and they need a strong social movement to provide the pressure to make those changes. Now, the Highland Good Food conversation is the basis of that social movement. So we already have that right here in this group. So what we need then is we need evidence, and then we need to communicate that to policymakers. So what we want to do going forward for the policy group is we want to collect stories and case studies of good food projects across the Highlands. And that includes all of you other groups. So we want to know about what you're putting in place, what you've found already in your research, all these stories and all the case studies. And also, we're hoping that all of you as individuals will talk to your communities and gather the stories from them. And then what we want to do, once we've got a good set of stories and case studies, is share these stories with other lobbying groups to show them how our vision and what we're working on align with their goals and their vision. So we're not going to have a direct voice with policymakers, especially not to start with. We're too small and we're too new. But what we can do is we can talk to other lobbying groups. We can get our stories into their ears. This is people like NFUS, National Farmers Union, RSPB, even Nature Scott, John Muir Trust, some of the really big players, Nourish, and get them to know what we're doing up here and how it actually works and how this can be a vision of how their policies can be put into practice. So we need to get the other lobbying groups to speak for us. Now, what we envision, and I will do, I've just done a really quick picture here. Share that. What we envisage is a central core hub. So coming from Group 4 Policy Group. Hopefully some of this team will be paid, but we'll work with what we can get, with a network of then volunteers to the community. So imagine if there was someone in each community that was just keeping an ear out for good projects that were happening in their area or new things that were happening. And then they were talking back to this central group to say, look, we've got this new person starting up a brilliant veg box scheme. Look, we've got this new community garden going in, collecting these stories for us. And then what we could do is put together some really nice case studies. Now, we could do with some funding for this, because they need to be really well communicated, really well presented case studies, possibly some good video making, filmmaking, a really well written story with some nice photos. Collect these key case studies that we can put to policymakers, but then also collect a list of wider projects. So if someone wants to drill down in detail on one idea, we've got a list of contacts that we can say, here, you can go and talk to this person, or here, go up to this community, you can talk to this person. So a bunch of people in the community, and hopefully some of you guys in this conversation will be able to do that job. Talk to your neighbors and then feed back the good stories of what's happening to the central policy group. They can put the case studies together, and what they'll also be doing is keeping an eye on what's happening in the wider world, listening to what's happening in government, listening to what's happening on the news, listening to what the current issue is, or what another lobbying body is currently campaigning for. And they'll be aligning those two things and saying, hey, look, you're focusing on local food hubs. Well, here, we've got a great case study of how that's working up here. And it's not only delivering your goals of local food, but it's also delivering biodiversity and carbon carbon storage, and supporting our communities. So sharing those stories out with the wider environment. But this also, it has to be a two-way communication. So each of the lines that you can hopefully see on my screen is going to be a two-way communication flow. So the policy group is not only going to be taking stories from a network in the community, but it's also going to be feeding information back to them, feeding back, how policy is changing, or what we need political pressure on right now, or potentially some new research that's come in that might be of assistance to your local project, or even new funding streams that have come on board. But also just keeping that shared sense that we're all working on this together and that we are a movement. We're all doing this together. It's community driven, and it has to be that it has to come from the community. So the community volunteer link here is incredibly important, but feeding into this central hub that can then gather that and build that strength and put it out to make it a cohesive voice to be heard by the wider world. So I think, going forward, we do need some kind of manager or central position to kind of manage this core dissemination of information. Some funding would be good, as I said, to get the case studies put together. But one of the big things that we need is all of you to feed these stories into the middle, to help us gather this picture, gather this story, and help us find this Highland voice that we need to represent. Share with us the good food vision that we have and that we all have, so that we can tell that story out to the wider world. Okay, we're done.